What's happening, Minnesota Planetary Aquatics? Tyler here, coming at you with the third video in my series about pressurized CO2 injection systems. And in this video I'm going to be showing you how to put kit 1 together. This kit is a complete kit for $249, comes with everything you need, and we're going to be putting this together. And the reason I'm doing this video is just so you have a guide. When you bring this thing home, you'll know how to do it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start with is just some general safety precautions when you're dealing with this stuff. This is a CO2 cylinder. It's full of CO2. If you're not in a very well ventilated area or a small room, it could be very dangerous or lethal. So you got to be careful. You want to make sure that you're in a well ventilated area or a big room. Maybe open a window, turn a fan on, just in case. It's not that a little bit of gas will kill you, but if this thing were to leak or the whole cylinder were to degas into the room and it wasn't ventilated, or you didn't have a window open, you could pass out or worse. So just keep that in mind. It's not scary, but you do need to take certain safety precautions. So open a window, open a door. Test this out outside. You don't have to test it in your aquarium the first time. In fact, I recommend that you test it outside of the aquarium if it is your first time, just in case something goes wrong. The next thing I want to talk about is turning this clockwise off. This is off. If I turn this to the left, it's going to blast a bunch of CO2. You'll hear it really loud. So we're going to keep it off while we put all the items together. The first item we're going to snap onto here is, or I shouldn't say snap, I should say screw on, is the regulator, which I'll already have everything else put together. The post body kit is what it's called, where you have your solenoid and needle valve here, along with all the fittings that connect each component. So when connecting these two, don't forget to use your washer. You always want to have a washer in between the regulator and the CO2 cylinder to prevent leakage. So you just punch it in there like that and screw this on hand tight. Right there, get it nice and snug. And then once it's hand tight, you're going to really crank it down pretty hard, actually, with the pliers. And you kind of hold the regulator in at the angle which you want it to be at. I like to keep it at, a slight angle pointing upward so you can see it better, because usually it's down on the floor underneath your cabinet. And crank her down. I usually crank these down pretty hard. Sometimes it's hard to hold it and crank it at the same time. Just like that. So now the regulator is connected to the cylinder, and the next component after the needle valve is going to be the bubble counter. And these fluval bubble counters come with little direction arrows on it, so you know which way the air is flowing. And so what you want to do here is just cut a length of tubing. For this, you want something pretty small. It's just going to come off here, and you kind of size this up as you go. So it's going to be about, about here. Helps to have a sharp blade, by the way. And then CO2 comes in on this side because the arrow's pointing down. So what I do here is slip the tubing through the cap, push the tubing over the nipple on the bubble counter and then tighten down. Tighten that down. And again, you want this stuff tight. You do not want any leaks. The whole point of setting this all up is 100% zero leaks. You don't want any leakage of CO2 at all. And these push to connects are pretty easy. You just push them in. That's it. So essentially we're done up into the point where we're at this bubble counter. So what I'm going to do is connect the next piece of tubing. So I'm going to pull this piece off, slip the next piece on. Oops, gotta add this on here. So you slip that little cap on there with some thread. It's got threads on it, and then you thread it onto the bubble counter. And then after the bubble counter, you can do your check valve. The check valve also has a direction indicator on it, showing which way the air goes. Remember, the arrows point in the way the arrows point in which way the air is going. There we go. So that part's done. Now, what we're going to do is connect the tubing onto the other side of the check valve and kind of size this up. It's got to go up over the rim of the tank and down to a few inches, maybe 4 or 3 inches above the substrate inside the tank. So I size this up like, just kind of like so. And I'll say, okay, it's going to be about that high. And we'll cut it off with a razor blade there. Then we can hook up the glass diffuser. You just slide it right on. Gotta be careful with these diffusers. You don't want to push too hard on the J, the end of the J, because the glass is fairly weak here. I mean, it's just glass, so it can break on you. So if you need to, you can dip the end of these into hot water and they form much better. They'll just slide right on there. Take the suction cups, put them on. We'll just use one for now, for demonstration purposes. And you can go ahead and actually put it right in the tank. All right, so essentially I'm done. I've got it all set up. You might not set it up exactly this way. You might decide you want the drop checker closer up here. I'm sorry, the check valve farther up, or the bubble counter in a different position, or just located somewhere else. It really doesn't matter as long as you have it all the fittings put together and it's secure. So while I'm going to talk about the next section, I'm going to fill this bubble counter up. And you can just use tank water, but it's okay to use mineral oil. I've heard about people using vegetable oil, but really just tank water is fine. The only difference is tank water is just going to evaporate quicker. 3/4 of the way up, and you screw it back on. That part's done. Okay. If there's a cap or a nut on the working pressure gauge here, you just take that off, set that aside. Okay, one of the most important things you're going to want to know about this is you want to screw the working pressure gauge loose. You want it loose, which is counterclockwise. That's off. Okay, off, counterclockwise. I can't stress that enough. If you have this turned all the way the wrong way, which is clockwise, when you turn the pressure onto the regulator, all the air is going to fly right through it, and you can damage the regulators. Any regulator, not just these regulators. So I'm going to repeat that again. Counterclockwise. So it's off. So when I turn the CO2 cylinder on, the pressure is going to stop right before the first diaphragm. So let's turn it on. And you want to turn it all the way on. You don't want to just quarter turn it. You want to turn these things on. This is all the way on now. And you'll notice the gauge on the tank pressure gauge should read between 800 and 1000 psi in the green here, and sure enough it does. So the pressure's, the gauge is reading the pressure in the cylinder, and I don't hear any leaks, so that's always a good sign. And by the way, I'm going to show you how to leak test these things, because it is really important to leak test them. But as long as you're not hearing them for now, that's pretty good. And by the way, the only place it could really leak right now is either at this gauge here or at this connection here. So, and what we want to do is, you know, if you have a screwdriver, this is going to work much better. I just don't have one sitting here next to me, so I'm going to use my razor blade. But there's a slotted screwdriver fitting right here, and you want to start turning this on. And as you turn it clockwise, you'll notice the working pressure gauge increase. And actually, if you got strong fingers, you can kind of get it going yourself. So I always keep my working pressures at about 30. Seems to work best for me. So now I've turned it clockwise so far. The working pressure is at 30 psi. Okay? That means the regulator is letting 30 psi onto the needle valve. So now the needle valves, I have it off right now. I thought I had it off. Yeah, let's see. Let's turn it off. It's off, yeah. Let me rephrase. 30 psi is on the solenoid, but the solenoid isn't plugged in, so it's not letting any air through at all. So you gotta plug the solenoid in order to put the pressure onto the needle valve. So we can go ahead and do that now. And of course, I have the needle valve all the way clockwise, which is off. So it's off. It shouldn't let much air through at all, if any. And you'll hear it tick when I plug this thing in. There it goes. And when I start turning this counterclockwise, which is opening it up, you'll see the air, the CO2 coming through the bubble counter here. And there we go. So now the air is going through the bubble counter and back up through the check valve, and it's going up the tubing, and in a few seconds, maybe 20 seconds, we're going to see the air release out of the CO2 diffuser, and there it goes. I'm just going to back off it a little bit, but there you go. The CO2 is now dissolved into the water. And that's essentially how you set this thing up. Now, you can plug the solenoid into the timer and keep it on a timer. I highly recommend using a timer. If you don't, you can really screw things up. So just save yourself the trouble and just get a timer. Well, they come with the package here, so you know, if you don't want to use this one, you can always buy a different one. But this is just a standard timer. I use them on all my equipment, and they work great. So that is how you get these things going and set them up. I'm gonna just pick up the camera and give you a closer look at you know, what all the equipment looks like. Bubble counter. Now here you got the solenoid and the needle valve. There's the cylinder gauge, reading at about 800. That's good. The working pressure is at about 30. And we'll go up here. The tubing goes up and over the tank and down to the glass diffuser. Now I just have one suction cup on here, and it's not on there very well. I just kind of stuck it in there for demonstration purposes, but obviously you can secure that with both suction cups and straighten things out so it looks a little better. So there you go, guys. For, you know, 249 bucks, you can get yourself CO2 injected in your tanks. In the next set of videos, I will be showing you the other setup that I have available. It's at a cheaper cost. It is still a pressurized CO2 injection setup. However, it's not quite as of a good quality. The fittings are a little smaller. They require a special compound on the joints because they're a little bit more fragile. The needle valve is not as good of a quality, meaning it doesn't hold quite as well of a bubble count, but the cost is justified, and I leave the decisions up to you. Sometimes cost is a factor for people, and that's understandable.